He's Bob Glauber, dropping on by after last night's thriller on Monday Night Football. Bob, good morning.
Damon, how are you, man?
I'm great, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
How you doing, man? I'm doing great.
I'm
Doing
good.
great.
That was quite a night last night. Huh? I've never seen anything quite like that.
Last night was a total thrill. Were you watching it excited because we were watching two of the best offenses go toe-to-toe, or did you grimace because there was no defense being played?
All right. I try not to be the guy who is, hey, get off my lawn, kids. I really do. And I love the NFL, and I've loved it for a long time. I did miss a little defense. There were a few key defensive plays, but, it's video game football, and it was, you just appreciate that for what it is, and you see more of that in the NFL today. All the rules are geared toward helping the offenses. And, listen, offenses are legitimately better in today's day, and coaching is great, and it's awesome. It was a fun game to watch. I don't know that I'd like to see that all the time, and you obviously don't, especially in playoff type situations when you get the better defenses in there. Well, those teams are going to be in the playoffs, and you're going to get some shootout type football, and throw in the Saints as well. And every team seems capable of having those shootouts. But it was a fun game. But yes, I did miss a little bit of defense.
Out of those two teams last night, whose defense is the bigger vulnerability in trying to get to a Super Bowl?
That's a good question, and I would say the Chiefs are a little bit more vulnerable. They did get Justin Houston back, and I think that's a big difference. And he did make a huge play there in the sack force fumble that led to a touchdown. I think the Rams are probably a little bit more reliable in this respect. Their personnel is very, very solid. The addition of Dante Fowler helped. Marcus Peters made a lot of big plays last night. He gets a little bit used in coverage. The key to me is if Aqib Talib can get back from the ankle problem in the next couple of weeks. And, they said it was an 8-week injury, and we're in that area right now. He is so reliable as a shutdown corner, it changes Wade Phillips' defense. And so I would say the addition of Talib in time for the playoffs makes the Rams' defense just a little bit better than the Chiefs.
NFL columnist Bob Glauber is our guest here on the DA Show on CBS Sports Radio. Last night, Patrick Mahomes was brilliant, but then also threw 3 interceptions and lost a couple of fumbles. How much responsibility does Mahomes have to take on the losing side of last night?
Damon, I think he's got to take a good share of it, and he did just that. After the game, he basically said, it's my fault. The turnovers, that they can't happen like that. The fumbles, a little bit more avoidable in that situation than perhaps the interceptions. You're throwing late, and you're desperate to try to get in position for either a field goal or a touchdown, and a couple of those picks late were unfortunate. One of them, it looks like his arm got hit or the ball got, the trajectory of the ball definitely got impacted by the pass rush. So I think it's definitely on him. And, we're still talking about a guy in his first year as a starting quarterback. It's incredible that he puts up those kind of numbers, and we gotta get on his case for turnovers. But, he owned up to it, and he was responsible for those turnovers, and that really was the difference in the game. I believe it was 21 points that the Rams scored off turnovers, and that's going to kill you in this league.
Can the Rams beat the Saints in a playoff game, which they were unable to do a couple of weeks ago in the regular season?
Well, tell me where it is, and I'll tell you who will win. Because I really think that if it's in L.A., the Rams would win, and if it's in New Orleans, I think I give the Saints the edge. I think home field advantage is much less of a factor in today's NFL than it used to be, but I think in this case it would absolutely be a factor. You also got to look at, I'm trying to figure out whether the Saints defense is for real. Giving up 21 points in the last 2 games, but they've played inferior competition in that spot. But I do think Dennis Allen, the defensive coordinator, has done a nice job in getting that defense back to playing decent football. And at times dominating, depending on the competition. They went into Cincinnati last week and just buried the Bengals. It was pathetic on the Bengals' part. So I do think that the Saints kind of have that mojo going, that Super Bowl type feel to them. And I think it would be, I don't want to say a layup if they played the Rams in New Orleans, but I think they'd beat them in a playoff situation. And I think that the Rams would get the advantage if that game is in L.A. You slow down the Saints a little bit on that grass track, and you get a little bit more advantage. And if you have to leave back in the lineup, I think that's a big, big difference there.
Bob Glauber, longtime NFL columnist, joining us this morning here on the show. You just wrote a book, Guts and Genius, about the three greatest coaches of the 80s and three of the greatest of all time, Gibbs, Walsh, and Parcells. You just said something which piqued my interest. Why do you think yesteryear, this era, the 80s, home field advantage was more dominant than it is now?
You know, that's a really good question, and I think the answer is mostly free agency. And I think free agency has kind of, I don't want to say watered down, but it's made it more even around the league. Back in the 80s, you know, you could basically keep teams together. And Walsh, Gibbs, and Parcells had the advantage of coaching essentially the same team year after year. The free agency rules were very much against players. You could keep teams together. You paid your highest, you know, your most valuable players, and they got their money, but, you know, you couldn't move. So the advantage was you have these rivalries and you have these competitions from year to year, and you know what you're getting. And I think that the familiarity created those kinds of rivalries. I was talking the other day to somebody. I was like, what's the greatest rivalry in today's NFL? And I'm like, I couldn't really come up with it. And it's kind of a stunning, you know, it's not an indictment, but it is what it is. You know, it's just from year to year, things change so much. But back then, you know, you could keep teams together. And I think the home field played more of a role then because it was just such a, you know, they were so familiar. And it was like, okay, the Redskins were great at home and the Giants were great at home. And, you know, that generally was the difference in those kinds of series. And same with the 49ers Giants. I mean, Bill Walsh got crushed by Bill Parcells 2 years in a row in playoff situations. And I think the free agency has enabled teams to kind of make it more even in this league. And that's why you see these, you know, worst to first type jumps every year by some team in the NFL.
Offense changed for the NFL in the 80s, and guys like Walsh and Gibbs were reasons for that. I think about last night and all the offense that we saw that would kind of never happen that long ago. But last night, were there traces of these two guys, maybe specifically Bill Walsh, since Bill Walsh was the head coach who handed things down to Mike Holmgren, and then Andy Reid learned under Mike Holmgren in Green Bay? Did we see some of the roots of Bill Walsh last night?
No question, Damon. I was thinking about that myself. Obviously, I'm thinking in those terms because of what I wrote. But Bill Walsh created the greatest coaching tree, not only in the NFL but in the history of pro sports. And both Andy Reid and Sean McVay are from that tree. And I think Bill Walsh, looking down on that game, would have kind of smiled and said, good. Now play a little defense, because he was, Bill was he didn't get good until his defense got good, but he was able to play spatial football and coach spatial football in that he could get open spaces and create open spaces, and it was incredible. And that game was all about open spaces last night. The coverage, those offenses dictated to those defenses, and that was the difference. So absolutely an impact from Walsh in this case, and those two coaches are indirect descendants of Bill Walsh, but still he's the guy who kind of started it, taught Mike Holmgren, who taught Andy Reid, and then, Shanahan down to Gruden, and Gruden was not quite a direct descendant of Walsh, but he handed it down to Sean McVay, and it's just kind of this nice continuum of coaching, excellence that still lives on to this day. It's amazing.
So the spread concepts that are all over college football and now into the NFL as well, you're mentioning space, and that is Bill Walsh. What is the lasting legacy of Joe Gibbs in his mind in modern football?
Damon, Joe Gibbs' coaching tree was not good. And I think it's a testament to how brilliant he was. He had a great staff, Richie Pettibone. Joe Bugle was a great offensive line coach. Both of those guys got chances to be head coaches. Pettibone lasted a year in Washington, and Bugle lasted a couple of years in Oakland and Arizona. But they weren't able to kind of continue the legacy of Joe Gibbs. And I think it was just this, he kind of captured that thing in that era, in that 11-year period. He won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks who never went to the Hall of Fame and never got close to the Hall of Fame. And brilliant tactician, and I don't know that you see all the kinds of max protect concepts from Joe Gibbs. This is it's a freewheeling NFL game now. But I do think what Joe Gibbs did, and that continues today, is that he imagined things differently than what was going on at that time. He was an innovator, and he took what defenses were doing and he reacted to it, and was able to kind of build a better mousetrap. And he did it in brilliant fashion to the point where you could argue, based on those three different quarterbacks and winning three different Super Bowls, you could argue that he's the greatest coach of all time, because every other coach on the Mount Rushmore of coaches had that one quarterback. Belichick had Brady. Lombardi had Bart Starr. Bill Walsh had Joe Montana. All of them had that one quarterback, except for Joe Gibbs.
Bob Glauber joins us. Really cool book he's got, Guts and Genius, the story of three unlikely coaches who dominated the NFL in the 80s, Parcells, Walsh, and Gibbs. I want to wrap up with this with about a minute left. Do you consider Bill Belichick a Bill Parcells disciple? I know he was a longtime assistant, but there's a lot of differences between them, and they certainly clashed quite a bit during their coaching careers.
There's no question he's a disciple. And, they had their differences, there's no question, and Parcells was very hard on Belichick. But I did talk to Belichick about Parcells for this book, and he gives a lot of credit to Bill Parcells for making him the kind of coach he is today. Listen, Belichick did this on his own, and every coach, every championship coach does it on their own. It's not like, Bill Walsh, made Mike Holmgren a great head coach, who made Andy Reid a great head coach. These guys do it on their own. But the foundational theories that Parcells used to build the Giants were absolutely carried over by Bill Belichick, and there's a lot of similarities there. So, yes, they did have their differences, but I think that Parcells, especially in the latter part of his run with Belichick, started teaching him about what it takes to be a head coach and kind of imparted the lessons that Parcells got from other head coaches that he worked for. So, yeah, there's no question in my mind that Bill Belichick is a direct disciple and descendant of Bill Parcells, and that tree has kind of taken on its own roots and branches, and that continues today. It's really every coach, Damon, every single coach in today's NFL can trace their roots back to either Bill Parcells or Bill Walsh. Incredible. All wow. 32. And that includes Greg Williams, who replaced Hugh Jackson. So it's amazing. I mean, and it's not fake. It's just that's the truth.
That's extraordinary. Bob Glauber joins us, longtime football authority, columnist for Newsday. New book is out, Guts and Genius, the true story of three unlikely coaches who dominated the NFL in the 80s, and that'd be Parcells, Walsh, and Gibbs. Great stuff, Bob. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, man. Good luck with the book.
Thank you very much, Damon. Appreciate you having me.
You got it, man. Bob Glauber joining us this morning. Very cool conversation following last night's Rams and Chiefs game.